Okay, so I'm going to make you the host. All right, now, can you tell me at the bottom of your screen, do you see polling?
Yes.
Okay, so when Jeanette, her slides are, or the questions are marked by the slide. So when she gets to a polling question, she's going to say, now we're going to do a polling question. So then you would hit the polling button at the bottom. You're going to see it'll start on the first question by default. Then it'll say, there's a button that says launch poll. So you just hit launch poll. Jeanette's going to read the question. People are going to answer the question for about a minute. And then you're going to stop the poll and then you're going to share the results.
Okay.
And then just
Can I run through that once beforehand, or is that going to mess up?
You can, but I think I don't think it'll mess it up, but go ahead and try it. So try to launch the first question.
Okay.
No one will answer, so we'll
got it. So there's poll 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, and there's one per each slide.
Got it.
So
all right.
Yeah, and then once she's done, you can hit stop sharing. It'll go away, and you just close the poll down, and you just click it off. And then when she gets to her next one, you can click the polling button again, and you just go to the top, and there's a little down caret. Then you can select the next question.
Okay.
So you might want to make a little. What I do is take a piece of paper and like mark the number of questions, and after she does one, I mark it off, so I know when I'm scrolling, I can quickly get to the right question. And then I'll be back on after the first hour.
Okay.
I mean, I'll be around, but I now have people that are fixing the flood hole in my wall with loud equipment, plus my dogs are barking at them, and I'm on senior staff, so I'm a little distracted at the moment. So it would be best if you did that for me.
All right. Yeah, no problem.
Okay, also, somehow the webinar started like an hour ago. I don't know what happened. It just launched itself. So I've got to talk to Martin and figure that out, because now we've got 12 people that have been sitting here like staring, listening to us like, what are you guys doing? Because I don't know why it's already going. Hello, everybody. Hope you're doing okay today. So we'll let people start coming in. We'll give it about 4 minutes, Jeanette, and then, because we're already recording and we're already live, so what I'll do is just introduce you right at the hour, and then you can get started. And then Ken will do the polling with you. And then we'll have people do the Q&A in the chat, but I'll come in and help manage that after the first hour. Okay. All right, so we'll get started in about 4 minutes.
Sounds good.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Jeanette, you can go ahead and share your slides. Thank you for joining us for this day of the course. Let me get Jeanette's slides up before we get going. Great. So today we're talking about assessment, norms, and accreditation, and this will be with Dr. Jeanette Gorner, and she has spoken with you before, so I will let her reintroduce herself very briefly. Just a reminder that if you have questions, please use the Q&A box at the bottom right of the screen, and the people in the background that are monitoring, including myself, will get those questions asked to Dr. Gorner. If you have a technical problem, please use the chat button to let us know what your issues are having, and we'll make sure that you get that corrected. Hopefully you have all registered for you all received the handout for this session, and Dr. Gorner will be using polling throughout, so please be prepared to answer those questions. So with that, Jeanette, I will let you get started. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jeanette Warner. I work at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a pathologist. I'm anatomic and clinical pathologist, and I worked in Mexico right after finishing my training here also at Emory University. But I worked in Mexico in the National Cancer Institute, where I was the director of the clinical labs there. Then I came back to the States and worked at CDC for 10 years and then moved to Emory University. So today we're going to do a very exciting topic, which is the assessment, norms, and accreditation. So the learning objectives include, at the end of the module, you will be able to compare and contrast what is accreditation versus certification versus licensure. Then we will describe the process involved in development of standards, and then we will discuss the need for laboratory norms and standards in the laboratory. So you've seen this little square roundy thingy. And you've probably already talked a lot about process control. You've started to talk about other things as organization, personnel, and a variety of different things. This part of the quality management system is in the assessment, because everybody wants to have assessment so that we can end up having an accredited lab. So the first question that I have for you, and it's a polling question, although you can have more than one thing, so you can share whatever you have, is do you have licenses? Do you have certificates in your laboratory? Do you have accreditation? Are there national standards for laboratories in your country? Do you have regulations that you have to follow in your laboratory? So let's see if Ken can start the polling and we can get some going. Ken?
The first poll question I have is about laboratory directors.
Oh,
yeah, Jeanette,
okay.
that's not your first polling question.
Okay.
If you want people to just put answers to a general question, you can have them put that in the Q&A, but
that'd
the
be
polling
great.
questions are only the ones you programmed.
Okay, that'll be great. So what do people have in their countries? I don't see anybody putting anything in the chat. Well, it doesn't. I guess people should know what they have in their.
So Jeanette, someone just answered this. That said number 1 through 4.
1 through 4. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that's good. So people have.
And then
everything.
someone else just answered in the chat, all of the above.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Tim.
You're welcome.
So, oh God. No, this is not moving.
Okay, so more people are answering. Basically, they're saying all of the above.
Okay, that's excellent.
Yeah.
So, it's very important to have recognition and that you're delivering accurate results and reproducible results. So that's why it's very important to have accreditation in your laboratory. It's the recognition of compliance with quality standards and norms that are used in your country. So it's always very useful to make sure that your customers know that you're accredited. So now this is the first polling question. Which of the following is the responsibility of a laboratory director?
Jeanette, can they vote for more than one or just one?
At this point, there's only one.
Okay.
I don't know where people are in their voting. I guess we can see what we got. Ken?
So far, about a third of participants have answered.
Okay.
We're up to about a half.
But let's not hold it till everybody does it. Let's just go ahead and see what people thought. So what was the consensus of people?
Okay, so about 42% said seek information regarding accreditation. 28% said organize the lab audits, and 23% said explain to employees how to follow standards.
Well, I think the correct answer is what the majority of the people voted for. It's actually the director needs to seek information regarding accreditation of the laboratory. You usually have more than one person doing several things, and we're going to talk a little bit about what different people will be doing. Obviously, as laboratory director, you can do a lot of things, but you're having so many other things to do that you're not necessarily responsible on organization. So what we usually say is that laboratory directors seek information about appropriate norms and standards, implement the international or national standards, and seeks information about accreditation and certification process. So basically what we're doing as laboratory directors is use the best of our knowledge of what we've learned to provide the best service for our clients. So now, what is the responsibility of the laboratorian, the person that is doing the testing? So this is another polling question. So where are we, Ken?
We're at about 50%.
Okay, cool. Let's see what people thought. Okay, so most people think that the laboratorians are helping to prepare for assessments, and that actually is the correct answer for this particular question. So you have to have two other figures in your lab. Obviously, it's not a figure because you usually have more than one laboratorian, but they are the ones that should be aware of the requirements. They are the ones that contribute to the meetings, to meeting the standards. They're aware of the assessment process, and they help prepare the assessment. And then there should be somebody that is a quality manager. I think that's a person that is not the laboratory director, is usually a laboratorian that has, or we give them some time to be able to do the quality management process. And they usually are the ones that explain the process and for meeting the standards to the staff, to the laboratorians, and organize the laboratory in preparation for the assessment. So So we, as you can see, we have three groups of people. Well, one is not a group because you only have one person as a director, and then you only have one person as a quality management. But then the big bulk of the laboratory, which are the laboratorians, are basically doing the testing, and they are aware of the requirements, and they are the ones that are helping to prepare for assessments. So here are some laboratory, some stamps that relate to laboratory methods. You can see the chemistry one, you can see the microscopes, you can see one from England that has a rouleau and some sickle cells. So it's fun to see some of the stamps and how they've been looking at what we do in our laboratory. So let's now do some definitions. So what's a normative document? It provides rules and guidelines or characteristics of activities or their results. So that's like a norm that is usually provided in a country. In Mexico, we call them the normativas. Okay, so there's rules, but they're not written in stone. People tend to adhere to them, but they are not necessarily need to be followed. Then a standard document is established by consensus and it's approved by a recognized body. So that is much more enforceable, let's put it that way. This provides a common and repeated use of rules and guidelines or characteristics for activities or their results aimed at achieving the optimum degree under a given context. So once a norm or a rule or a guideline becomes more widely used, then you can establish a consensus and have a standard document. And then the last thing is you can have a regulation. And that once it's a regulation, it's a standard that is mandated. So as you can see, this goes in a progression. Okay, and so the regulation is usually mandated by a government agency or an authoritative body. So there could be, a country can define self-developed standards, or agencies can develop their own standards, okay? And these are usually developed by this particular organization, and they have their own way of trying to enforce these standards. They do not necessarily always conform to the international standards. However, in this world of globalization nowadays, I think everybody looks for the international recognized standards. So even though people we all started with self-developed standards, as things have moved along, we all look towards more international standards. So the next question that I have about a polling question is, what is an advantage of a self-developed standard? Okay, Ken, where are we? Ken?
We're at about 60, 2/3 of the participants have voted now.
Oh, okay, let's see what they say. So yes, that's the correct answer. They're progressively developed, and they're nice. They're a nice segue to later becoming adopted. Okay, so self-developed standards have advantages and they have weaknesses, like everything in life. And the advantages is they're optimized for local use, their recognized local strengths and weaknesses can be developed in a progressive step and can lead to full international recognition. The weaknesses, they may be very narrow or biased to the country or to the company or organization, and they may not be recognized by other organizations. So even though, and I think a lot of countries still have self-developed standards. However, as I said, in this world of globalization, people are moving more and more towards the more international standards. So what are standardization bodies that are international organization? Well, we have the International Organization for Standardization, which is ISO. We have the CLSI, the Clinical and Laboratory Standards Institute. We have the European Committee on Norms. And then we have the World Health Organization. Okay, so let's do the next polling question. Which one of the following establishes standards for specific diseases? Okay, Ken, where are we?
Okay, we're at about 70%.
Oh, wow. Okay. People are getting into the polling today. It usually takes a little bit of warming up. Okay, let's go and see what the people thought. So WHO, that's exactly the correct answer. So the WHO is the one that develops several standards for disease-specific diagnostics laboratories. And they do it for the areas where they have programs. Obviously, they have programs on polio and tuberculosis, on influenza, on measles. So there are several standards that are not necessarily only laboratory, although some of them are very heavy on laboratory. For all these diseases, for tuberculosis, there's a lot of material regarding how to comply with the different things that WHO says you have to do in your laboratories for diagnosis of tuberculosis. So the next question, the polling question is, which of the following organization is the largest with respect to published and publication of standards? Okay, Ken, where are we?
We're at 75%.
Okay, awesome. Let's see what the people thought. So ISO, okay, so that's the correct answer. So the ISO standards are well known, and that's the largest. And it not only does the standards for laboratories, for clinical laboratories, but it does for a lot of things. And so it's the largest developer and publisher of international standards. The standards are applicable to many kinds of things. As I said, it's not only the clinical laboratories or public health laboratories, it's a lot of different things. So I borrowed this slide from Dr. Amit Kalle. He has this, I love this little slide that says it's a can of beer and it has the ISO ISO here right at the top. So it's to me, it's really great to see that, great way of showing that ISO is across the board. So when we talk about the 9000 family, we refer to the quality management. And then the second number, the 2 dots, and then 2015 refers to the year where that version was created. So as the ISO standards get updated, you'll see those updates in that year. The ISO also includes the International Electrotechnical Commission. So sometimes you see ISO /EIC, as part of that naming. Then we have the Clinical and Laboratory Standards Institute. It's a global nonprofit standards developing organization. It promotes the development and use of voluntary consensus standards and guidelines within the healthcare community. The documents are developed by experts working on subcommittees or working on groups. So you have CLSI standards, for microbiology, and then for, antibiotic susceptibility. So there's a lot of different things that go into doing or developing the standards by the CLSI. And then the European Committee of Standardization, it basically is for the European community and its associated countries. It has general terms to include openness, transparency, consensus, and integration. So it can be used in other countries, obviously, because the Europeans have been everywhere. They put their fingers everywhere. So some people may put their or use those standards. So remember that we think of it in English, we see ECS. However, in French, which is the language it is CEN, which is Comité Européen de Normalisation. Okay, now the national standards and technical guidelines. So they can be very country specific, and they are based on usually international standards. So you see what the ISO has said or what the CLSI has said, and then you take that and then you apply it to what your country needs, because maybe in your country, the way the laboratory flows or the hospital flow is very different than what it flows in other places. So you may need to adapt it to the culture and the general condition of the country. So that's why it's important to look at country-specific standards and obviously to the guidelines. So they usually tend to supplement what the ISO standards are, and they're technical. They're for technical use of in the laboratories. They can address specific kind of testing. Okay, so here we have the covers of three different standards. You have here the quality standards, but this is in the Thailand. Okay, so this is the quality standards for health laboratories in Thailand. Okay, this is for the tuberculosis. Obviously, it has the little World Health Organization sign, and it's for the assurance of sputum microscopy in DOTS programs, the directed therapy. And then here you have the World Health Organization Africa for the SLIPTA. So you see the covers of difference and how they come to the different places where you need them. So ISO has its own, you can see a lot of the postage stamps that have been done by ISO. Here's one for the CEN, for the European one, and here's one for the WHO. So what do we need? Do we need certification, licensure, accreditation? So what do we need to do? How are the steps coming along? So licensure is granting the ability to practice. It's provided most often by a local government or agency, and is usually based on knowledge and training and skills. So like I have a license to practice medicine, and then the license for the laboratory is a license for the laboratory to produce results. So it's not only me having my license, but also the laboratory has a license. And then we have a certification. This is a formal attestation or confirmation of certain characteristics of an object, person, or organization. This confirmation is often, but not always, provided in some form by an external review, an education that you received, or assessment or audit. So the laboratory is certified by the College of American Pathologists, or at least the laboratory I work in, that's the certification. And then the accreditation is a specific organization process of certification. Okay, so you first acquire the certification and later you acquire the accreditation. So certification is usually a procedure by which a third party gives written assurance of product, process, or service that confirms to certain requirements. So you can have in a country multiple certification bodies. It's interesting, like, for example, each one, I put several examples there. Like, for example, in Spain, they call it the AENOR. And then in France, they have two, the AFNOR, and then the BVQR. And then in Switzerland, they have the IQNet. So you can see some countries have one, some countries have two, so on and so forth. And they usually refer only, or they are usually looking at the quality management system. So they're usually conforming to the ISO 900 family, 9000 family. Okay, so that's how this is, how they work. Now, the accreditation is a procedure by which an authority body gives formal recognition that a body or person or lab is competent to carry out specific tasks. This is only one recognized accreditation body in each country. Okay, so in France, we saw the certification, the AFNOR and AFNOR, but then they only have one accreditation body, which is the COFARC. Okay, and in the UK is the UCAS. Okay, and this is usually based on quality management system plus requirements that are technical and analytical, and they are based on the ISO 1725 or the ISO 50 and the ISO 15189. So you have the combination of the two ISO families there. Okay, so you can see how this the accreditation is usually only one. So what in Africa has been moving to is the strengthening laboratory management towards accreditation using the SLAMTA and the SLIPTA, which are basically WHO has been endorsing and trying everybody to use them. And they have other agencies that have endorsed this, and they include the US, the CDC, obviously the ASCP, so on and so forth. And it's a stepwise system, and you know better than I the type of system it is, because you probably have done it yourself. And it's based on the number of points that you acquire in each one of the accreditations that you, or the assessments that you go through. So you can see the different stars and trying to maintain those stars as you progress through your journey in this accreditation process. So in the United States, and in the background, you see the map of the United States, we are basically CLIA certified, and it's a funny name. It's Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendment Act, which is a little bit of a crazy name. However, that's the certification that we receive in our laboratories. We all have a CLIA certification. And then in our case, and here at Emory, we're CAP accredited, okay? And there are 3 federal agencies that are responsible for ensuring compliance of laboratory to CLIA, okay? They can be the Food and Drug Administration, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and the Centers for Disease Control. So you can see how complex, and each country has its own complexity regarding the certification and who they deem able to accredit laboratories, because you can have an accreditation done by the Joint Commission, which is part of the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services. So it's really sometimes confusing to think, because I can tell you what we do here in the States, but it can be very different in different countries. So it's important to realize that even though we all are talking about the same thing and we talk about certification and accreditation, the agencies that will do that will be different in each country. So the next polling question I have is, which is a characteristic of accreditation? Okay, Ken, where are we?
Right about 50%. So let's give them a little bit more time.
Okay,
Jeanette, this one is a little tricky.
I know it is tricky.
Yeah, even I can't really decide between two options. We'll see what the correct one is.
Well, according to the definitions, I guess that's what it will
Yeah.
be. But I agree with you. I think it's a tricky one.
Okay, we're at about 80% now.
Okay, let's see what people thought. Yeah, I think people got it right. It's given by an authoritative body, but I can see why Tim was saying, well, we want to comply with specific requirements.
Yeah, that was the one.
Exactly, but I can see why, because obviously the accrediting body is gonna, or the authoritative body is gonna have the specific requirements. Okay, so having the authoritative body is the one that defines what the requirements are. So, like for example, in the U.S., we are always looking at the CAP list. If you're inspected by CAP, you always go to your CAP list, because the CAP list will have all the things that they want you to do, which may be a bit different than if you were, they're not extremely different, but they may be a tad different than if you're inspected by the Joint Commission. In my case, it's really funny because I hold two licenses. We have two licenses, one for the point of care and one for the lab. And the point of care is basically inspected by the Joint Commission, while the lab is inspected by CAP. And we did it specifically for a reason, because point of care is done mostly by nursing. All the glucose meters and all these different things are done by nursing. And if I tell a nurse, oh, the College of American Pathologists doesn't think that you're doing something correct, they probably think, and why do I have to comply with the College of American Pathologists, which is CAP? So to me, it's really important that nursing is inspected, or the point of care, which is done by nursing, is more inspected by the Joint Commission. Because if I told the nurse, the Joint Commission said that you have to take the temperature of this refrigerator, they will be doing that. If I tell them that the Joint Commission, that the CAP is going to be doing the temperature, they probably don't pay that much attention to it. So to me, it's really interesting to figure out how do you do this compliance with the different and specific requirements. So it's interesting to think about. So the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation, the ILAC, is the international organization for accreditation of bodies' operation in accordance to the ISO 1711, okay? And is involved in accreditation of conformity assessment bodies. And so this 1711 includes all this other ISO others. So it takes into consideration the ISO family that is all in the 1700s, okay? We say 1700s here in this country, but maybe people, it's not 17, it's 17,000s. So you can see that the calibration of laboratories is the 1725, the same as testing laboratories, which is 1725. Then specific for medical testing is the 15189. And then inspection bodies is 1720, and proficiency testing is 1743. So each one, and there are lists that have all the different specific comments, and they're all embodied in the ISO accreditation. So now the question you always have to answer is, where is your laboratory? Are you licensed? Are you certified? Are you accredited? And hopefully most people are moving into the accreditation arena rather than just saying, oh yeah, I have a license, or oh yes, I have a certification, but I'm not yet accredited. So it's important to be thinking of moving from certification to accreditation. Okay, so the elements of the accreditation processes, you need an accreditation body, you have your standards, you need to have assessors, and you need to have a laboratory so that they can go ahead and inspect it or assess that place. So I think we've talked about the different components. It's sometimes a little tricky to think about it, but it's a good way of trying to think how we stratify, let's put it that way, the different components of the accreditation process. So you need to think that certification and accreditation bodies are knowledgeable. They are standard-based. Hopefully, they're all objective. They have competent staff, and they give you an approved. They are approved by the country to help you in your process of accreditation throughout. So the next following question I have is the ISO, and this refers to something that I said yesterday. So the ISO, not yesterday, that I said previously, the ISO 1725 refers to what? How are we doing, Kim?
43% so far.
Okay. I'll give it a little more time.
Oh, Jeanette, I'm moderating the questions. We have a great question. I'm gonna, next time, after maybe your next few slides, I'll ask it. It's a great question.
Okay, so let's see where we are here. Ken?
Okay, we're at about 2/3 have answered.
Okay, let's see what they think. So actually, it recognized general competency, okay? Rather than being, it's part of the audit, okay? But it recognizes general competency. So the 1725 is basically general requirements for competence. It includes the testing, calibration, and sampling, and quality administrative technical systems. It does not cover compliance with regulatory and safety requirements of laboratory operations. So it's basically the competence that you have in your lab about testing, calibration, sampling, the quality administrative and technical systems that you have in your lab. You want to do the question, Tim?
Yes.
Okay.
So the question is, and I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be saying names. I have not been reading names here, just in case people don't want that. But the question is, why is accreditation so costly? Annual fees, assessment fees, etc. Yeah, I thought it's a good question.
It's a great question,
yes.
And I think it has to do with all the administrative stuff that you have to do. Okay, so when you are because you have to hire somebody to fly over, have all the lists, make sure that everything is, have all the material ready, and do all the assessment itself. That's why I assume they're costly. I don't know if they should be very, very costly, but they're costly. So I'm really, this is a great question because of another issue. Like, for example, I told you that I have two CLIA licenses. One that is the point of care that is done in the hospital, and then the other one that is the laboratory itself. The CAP inspections are usually done by peers. So we, as a lab, go and visit Johns Hopkins, and then Johns Hopkins goes and visits Northwestern, and Northwestern goes and visits Colorado, and then Colorado comes and visits us. So it's a peer review process where, we actually, as part of the system, even pay for our trip over there and do a lot of different things. There's some reimbursement coming along, but that's how it works. Now, the Joint Commission tends to be cheaper than CAP. Even though the CAP, peer to peer, the Joint Commission, if you are accredited or assessed by the Joint Commission, they have people that have been medtechs, but they're trained inspectors. And so they're supposed to be more honed in to doing exactly what they need to do. And it's interesting because they are, as I say, cheaper than the accreditation done by CAP. So that's a great question, because as I say, we use the two different bodies of accreditation that we can potentially use. And we know what the difference is between the two of them. I don't know if Tim, do you have any other comments regarding that?
No, only that it might be, if some of our participants know what different accreditation schemes cost, that might be useful to us. For me, I know what the CAP, College of American Pathologists, costs. I also know what they cost from an African perspective, having run a lab that was CAP certified in Uganda. And so, but it would be interesting to realize, to figure out how much it would say. Let's say we went with, say, SANAS or some other local group that was applying ISO standards. Would it be the same kind of costs, which is in the range of, I would say, say $5,000? Would it be that same cost, or would it be lower? That I don't know, but it would be interesting to know that.
Yeah, and as I say, I think it has to do with mostly the administrative part of it.
Yeah.
Making sure that you have all the lists ready, making sure that you're having the correct list, making sure that you have the inspectors to do whether you train them or whatever you're going to do, and send them over there. So there are costs associated with people moving around and doing this and using the correct list, let's put it that way, because a lot of it is checklists. Okay, but that's a great question.
And Jeanette, if I could add, I think one big factor is the location of the accrediting bodies and the languages, because, for example, in Mozambique, they have SANAS right next door in South Africa, but they don't have any Portuguese-speaking staff. So in order to have a lab in Mozambique with their Portuguese SOPs reviewed, they need to bring someone from Portugal, which is obviously much more expensive than, if there were a regional accrediting body in Africa that was Lusophone.
Oh, thank you so much. That's excellent. Okay, so let's keep on going. Let's talk a little bit about the ISO 15189. It's specific to patient care, thus it has specific requirements, special requirements for sampling, report results, and ethics. The special requirements for personnel, for example, the laboratory director should be a medical doctor or a scientist who can do that same role. It has attention to laboratory safety, including samples and personnel and patients. And it demands rules of internal and external quality control, as well as application of critical alert levels, which I don't think are done in other things that are not necessarily clinical laboratory, and establishment of specific reference values for different gender and ages. So you can see how it is very specific for the laboratory. So in the version from the 2012, it was deemed, it's the last one, it was deemed to be more compatible with real work medical laboratories. So I'm just giving two examples here. Is like, for example, they say that measurement of uncertainty is mandatory for all tests that are provided. So we're always talking about the coefficient of variation of the glucose or the coefficient of variation of SGOT or whatever we're measuring. We know what our uncertainty is, and we measure that constantly in the laboratory. However, which I find fascinating, it's not obligatory for us to inform our customers, patients or doctor, of this uncertainty. And I think that's one of the things that I always have a pet peeve with my colleagues, the clinicians, because they always say, oh, the glucose was 120, and they hold on as if it was 120. But if we had repeated that glucose 4 or 5 times, maybe once it must have been 119, maybe 118, that sort of thing. So to me, we know that as laboratorians, and we know what our coefficient of variation is. However, our clinicians don't necessarily know it. And basically that's what the ISO 15189 2012 says. And then there's also a new paragraph named management commitment functions. And I think that's another very important thing, because sometimes we want things for the lab that we need, but we need to have the buy-in of the administrative body of the hospital. And so now with this new version, that commitment needs to be there. So I think it's good that it's moving in that direction. So the process of accreditation, obviously, it should not be taken lightly. It should be, it should be something very purposefully done. It's a commitment. You have to plan about it. You have to have knowledge of what you're doing, and you need to know what resources you have to do it. And it's all the requirements that you need to be able to do that accreditation. So I think this is going to be the last polling question I have from the presentation. This is, what does the consensus mean when we're talking about accreditation? Okay, Ken, where are we?
We're at about 40%.
Oh, let's give him a little more time. This is all about language. Okay,
we're about
let's see.
70% now.
Let's look at it. Okay, so actually the correct answer is there are no strong, compelling objections. Okay, and I think it's interesting to think about it this way, and let me tell you why. I think if you think about it, when you're in a consensus, if everybody thought the same way, well, then we would not need a consensus, because we already all think the same way. Here, the most important part is that there's people that are not objecting to whatever you're doing, okay, or objecting with a very strong definition of what you're objecting to. So I think it's interesting to see it more on more than being everybody on the same page, thinking, well, even though not everybody's on the same page, at least there's nothing that is wrong or completely bad about something. Okay, so consensus represents a general agreement in the absence of strong and compelling objections. Okay, then the normative statement is required and essential. Here's where you use the word shall. Okay, so consensus versus normative. And then informative statement is when you have something that is an explanation or it's a cautionary, and it usually provides an example, okay? So you can see how the different things form when you're doing this accreditation. So you want to have consensus so that something is not completely objected by somebody. And then when it's a norm, which is a little better, which is a little more stronger than other guidelines, so you have a norm, you use the word shall, and it's required and it's essential. Okay, so the accreditation terms are compliance, non-conformity, and verification of conformity. So compliance meets both the text and the spirit of the requirement. Non-conformity is a failure to fulfill the requirements of a specified process or structure, and can be said, okay, it's a major or complete or a partial non-conformity. And then the verification of conformity is there evidence that you've conformed to whatever you are complying to. So, when you get inspected, you're always, they find something, and then you always have to say, well, does it meet the text and the spirit? Okay, so you're compliant, or, well, they came and thought that this was not right, but then when you look at it, well, is it really a major failure or is it a minor failure? Are you hurting patients? Okay, and then you have to give examples of why you think whatever you're doing is not really a problem, and why it is still in compliance. I don't know if all that made a little sense, but that's a little bit how we manage when we get inspected. And for our next accreditation cycle, how we manage the places where we have non-conformity, because we always have something that is not perfect. Even though you try to be perfect, you are always having here or there a non-conformity, and then you have to look at the text and the spirit, and then you have to decide, well, is what I'm doing against whatever the text is, or am I hurting patients, and is it a major or a minor conformity? So accreditation is obviously a very important process. It's continual, and we are constantly being ready to be accredited. Okay, it should be a way to do error reduction. It is a way to do customer satisfaction, and obviously it's all part of the quality management of the laboratory. So accreditation outcomes include strength and integrity of the quality system, continual monitoring of the quality system, and recognition of the efforts that you're doing. And when you have an accredited laboratory, you usually perform better on proficiency testing, and you're more likely to have working quality management systems in your lab if you've been accredited. So accreditation is an accomplishment, okay? And when you have an accreditation that starts in 2014, and then it's maintained through 15, 16, 17, well, you've maintained an achievement of your accreditation, and that is very good for your laboratory. So in summary, we have standards that provide guidelines that form the basis of our quality practices. They are developed by organizations. The accreditation and certification process that recognize a laboratory is usually designed to meet certain standards, and more we're going to the ISO standards. It's an active quality management program that can assure the laboratory is in a constant state of accreditation readiness. So you're constantly doing this because you know that you need to be ready for your next assessment and get your accreditation. So the key messages are accreditation is an important step in the continual improvement of quality management system. It is an accomplishment to be accredited. It is an achievement to maintain that accreditation. So I don't know if there's any questions or comments.
Sorry, I was talking, but I was muted. We have two questions here,
Okay.
which came in during your talk, so I'm sure more will be coming. The first is, what is the importance of performing a measurement of uncertainty?
Okay. It's interesting to ask that question, but when I'm thinking about the coefficient of variation that we test for all our analytes, it is important because it, in some way, if you think, let's just go to the very basics. So when you're doing your Levy-Jennings charts and you're measuring your controls to make sure that you're in control in your measurement of glucose or potassium or whatever, you want to have a certain, you're allowed a certain variability. Okay, you want to be very close to your mean, but that's that variability that you're allowed yourself. But if you have too much variability and you get out of control because your control, you didn't do maintenance or whatever, and that internal quality control went 3 SDs, then you know that you have to do something to your instrument to maintain it in control. So that's why it's so important for us to maintain or to know what our expected variability is for every analyte. I don't know if that answered the question.
Well, I wanted to share a story, which is kind of uncommon, but we had one. This is back when I was doing the urine electrophoresis. We had a patient whose urine had always been, no protein, no protein, no protein, which is normal. And then they had a reading of, I think it was like 6 milligrams per deciliter, something small on the bottom end. And the doctor was concerned that all of a sudden this patient that had normal kidney had some protein and was wondering. So he wrote me and was asking, is it real or is it low or what is this? Because it was such a small number. And so what I did was I went back and looked at our CV at the low end, and the CV was actually pretty good. So I told him, yeah, it's a reliable number. So that's one small example of how the measurement of having the CV helped me to be confident in that, yeah, at least that's the way I use it.
So I think.
Go ahead, Janet.
So I think you're constantly using it.
Yes.
You're going from one lot to another lot of a reagent, and you want to maintain the same kind of measurement. You don't want to all of a sudden have this lot be completely different than the previous. So you look at your CVs and see how close they are and if they're similar to the previous lot. So we're constantly using that that variability, because I think it's so important to make sure that you're not completely off the charts.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very, and some analytes have very small coefficients of variation. Like for example, the electrolytes usually have very small coefficients of variation, and there's other analytes that have a humongous coefficient of variation, usually like molecular tests, because they're logarithmic. They have like humongous coefficient of variation. So
Jeanette, I'm gonna jump in just because the questions are coming in fast. So this is we have about 8 questions here. So I'm gonna first of all, I'm gonna combine 2 of them. Because they're asking the same thing, and I think it's a really key point. So one question is, what is the impact if a lab is doing all tests correctly but failing to be accredited and all staff are competent? And then someone else asks kind of the same question, the same flavor, but says, what happens if a lab is not accredited but ISO certified and continues to provide services? Well, it's not quite but as is impact of not being accredited in the long run, ? So basically, if a lab is good but not accredited, what's the impact of that?
So that's an interesting question. I guess if you're doing good work, why should you? That's the question. If you know you're doing good work, why should you get accredited? Well, I think everything in this life is a comparison. Unfortunately or unfortunately, you always are comparing yourself to others. So if you have two labs and one is accredited and the other is not, even though they're doing maybe the same work, if people are flocking into the accredited lab, it's because they are accredited. So in some way or another, it's a very philosophical question, but at the same time, I think you want accreditation because it's a recognition. You want that recognition. You want your customers to know that you have that recognition. What do you think, Tim?
I totally agree. It's like having it's a way to signal like, okay, we meet this certain standard of quality, and it's a way to signal to the outside, to people outside. Because within the lab, you're doing good work, but to signal to the outside, I think it's accreditation is the way to do that. Okay, next question. Go ahead.
And I think that's what. Let me finish one thought. Yeah. And that's why when you are accredited, you always put your accreditation certificate at the entry of the lab, so that anybody can look at it. Because internally, you're doing the right thing. But I think, as you said it correctly, I think it's the outside that needs to know that you're accredited.
Yeah. So this question talks about it goes beyond just the lab. And he says, I think it's a he. Is there an accredited body that gives or authorizes an accrediting organization? Meaning, who gives the authority for accreditation for an accrediting organization to accredit laboratories?
Oh, that's a great question. Mm-hmm. In the United States, the way we have it set up is that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, which are a government organization, they are the ones that define who is accredited to give accreditations. Okay, so it's in our environment, it is a branch of our government, the one that deems different organizations able to do that accreditation. I assume that that's what happens in most countries, but I may be totally wrong. So that's what I've seen. I've seen that in Mexico, and I've seen that in the States, but I don't know how it is in other countries. It's usually the government, and you could potentially even have like.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Janet. I'm agreeing with you.
So you could potentially have, like, for example, the WHO may want to deem certain agencies in different countries to be accredited, but I don't, for certain things.
Yeah, I mean, so what you said is about that, so some organization has to give them the authority, and in many countries it is some kind of a country organization. So so SANAS is the South African government, KENAS in Kenya, KENAS, it comes from the government. The authority comes from the government. So let's see. This one talks about. It's a very specific question, which I'm not sure but someone in the group may have the expertise, which says, when will ISO 15189 version 2012 be revised or updated? I do not know.
I do not know either.
Okay, so maybe someone can answer live in the chat. Next question, concerning non-conformity classification. Why do accrediting bodies classify them based on your lab's ISO fulfillment and not necessarily based on the severity of patient injury? Oh, this is interesting.
Okay. Oh, this is very interesting. So I'm going to speak to the way that the Joint Commission, which is one of the accrediting bodies here in the United States and does the assessments, has moved into. Okay, so they, instead of looking at just one failure, they say, okay, we found one failure. Say they didn't take the temperature in this refrigerator. They're not monitoring the refrigerator. So they take it and then they see how frequent it occurs. Okay, and so they say, okay, temperature in the refrigerator is not being checked, and it occurs all the time in every single refrigerator everywhere. Then it's a red failure, and it's a big flag. Okay, you have to do something about this. However, if they find that it's only one refrigerator and that is hidden who knows where, and that somebody has forgotten, and then they checked all the other refrigerators and your blood bank is perfect, everybody's checking all the temperatures there, everything else is perfect, they put it as a non-compliance, but they put it in what they call the yellow part. It's not a red, purple, red, but in the yellow part where they say, yeah, we noticed that, but don't worry too much because it's not that important. But the closer you're getting to the red in the Joint Commission, the more frequent and the more potential for producing harm, then it becomes a major non-compliance. So I think that why am I telling you all the story? Because I think that it goes to the heart of what this person is saying. It's saying, well, you can have something that is, yes, it's not compliant, but is it harming the patient? Is it prevalent? Is it happening all the time? And I think accrediting organizations are going to start moving into the same thought process that the Joint Commission is already doing. The CAP is not doing that for us, but the Joint Commission is moving into that direction. And I find it fascinating because it goes a little bit to what you're saying. Now, when will everybody move to that? I don't know. But I think there's already a thought process that's something that you need to start thinking about. But that's an interesting question. And I think it's interesting, especially knowing how the Joint Commission does it in comparison to CAP. And I don't know how other accrediting agencies do. I hope that answered the question.
I think so. Oh, so someone answered, actually give an answer for the 2012 thing, which I'm going to read out loud. Thank you for that. So okay, yeah, we have two. Okay, we have two folks who just gave opinions. So thanks for giving this. So the first one says the revision of ISO 15189 2012 began in 2015 and is still ongoing. Okay. The process takes years and the pandemic may delay it further. So thank you for that. And then someone else said, for the case of countries like Uganda, where CAP, SANAS, KINAS do accreditation of some laboratories. Okay, so this is a different question. Okay, so before I come to this question, let me ask a different one that came in earlier. So the question that came in earlier says, what should prompt a laboratory to start seeking accreditation?
Oh my God, that's an interesting question. I think, to me, it's getting better. If you want to get better, you want to show that accreditation. Okay, so as I said in the presentation, you get accredited, but you want to keep on that accreditation going. You don't want to just, okay, I got 1 star, I can keep on going. You want to keep on moving further and further into that accreditation process, because it basically tells you that you're basically putting a quality management system in place.
Okay, that's great. So so now I'll go back to the question that we had, which was for the case of countries like Uganda, where CAP, SANAS, KINAS all do accreditation of some laboratories. Is there a component of the Ugandan government that authorizes these accrediting bodies to do accreditation in countries like Uganda?
That is so specific. I really don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. We used to have a panelist that was kind of a lab expert from Uganda, but I don't see him or her. I don't see him here today, so I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe we have someone on the line who knows. So please jump in and help us. Okay. So the another question just came in is, how does accreditation assess attitudinal situation? Okay, this is not clear to me. Mr. Olatunji, you may want to elaborate a bit. It's not clear to me what the question means. So Jeanette, I'll read it again, maybe to be clearer. How does accreditation assess attitudinal situation?
The attitude of the lab?
Yeah, that's why I'm asking him
Yeah.
to elaborate. So let's give him a minute,
Yeah.
so he might say more.
So do you want to jump into the case, Tim?
Yeah, I don't have it, but I'm
okay, I do have
yes.
it.
Okay, good. So so this is a good place to pause. So while we're doing the case, he'll hopefully bring more information. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. So the case that I want to talk about is actually based on a paper that was published in the African Journal of Laboratory Medicine in 2017. And it's what Mozambique did for accreditation of their national TB laboratories. Okay, so I'm going to show you, I divided, in order for us to look at it, I divided the graph into two parts so that you can see it. But when you're going to look at the graphs, which are the next two slides, the blue bars are the baseline assessment that was done in 2011. And then the red bars are going to be the audit that was done in 2012. And then the green ones are the audit that was done in 2013. And so when we're looking at these graphs, and I chose this instead of, there was a lot of questions about what to use for this particular part of the course. And I decided to use this rather than using one flip-chart question or something like that. I decided to use this because I like to show the journey, and I like to show the thought process that went into the journey that the NTB lab in Mozambique went through. And I think it's a good way of showing how a lab is going through their accreditation process. They haven't published anything after that. I wish we had more data, but at this point, this is what we are going to look at. So the questions I have, based on the baseline data from 2011, what improvements would you implement in the areas that are most efficient? And then the next questions, which are the areas that shows most improvement? And then which are the areas that show decrease in points between 2012 and 2013, and what would you do to improve the next time around? Okay, so here comes the first graph, the first part of the graph. Okay, so we have documents and records, management reviews, organization personnel, client management and customer service, equipment, and internal audit. Obviously, the baseline is done by the internal audit, and you can see that internal audit, they had 0 because they were doing it for the first time. But you can see in documents and records, at the baseline, they only did 2 points. However, on the next time around, on the 2012, they ended up with 20 points. So obviously, they worked on how to manage their documents and records correctly. The management review, it's interesting because the improvement there was improvement. There's nothing that it didn't occur, but the amount of improvement was not as impressive. The same apparently happened with client management and customer service. There was improvement, but not humongous. Okay, the two areas in this graph that had the most improvement, if you think about it, were the documents and records and the equipment. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next one. So here you have purchasing and inventory, process control, information management, corrective actions, occurrence incidents management and process improvement, facilities and safety, and then the total score that they had. So you can see that big jumps were in purchasing and inventory, and the other big jump probably was in the process control. So it's interesting to see all this different how, you know, between the initial assessment and how they improved in 1 year. And one of the things, if you go to the article, one of the things that they talk about is they have a first table where they say, well, what are the areas where they put the most emphasis on? They improved a lot on the type of quality of the samples that they received. So, and that happens a lot in anatomic pathology, and I hope it happens in every single lab, but I think it's very important to make sure that the specimen that you received has not been like cut in half, or that the specimen that you receive is the right sputum and comes to you in the right container, and it comes to you in you know, not delayed, you know, 3 years or, you know, however amount of time. It comes to you as soon as it can get to you. So they put a lot of emphasis on samples that they receive, and that goes to the process control, because process control includes how you manage that sample and how do you teach the clinicians to send you the correct samples and in the correct containers, et cetera, et cetera. The second one thing that they did, and that's, I think, in the previous one, it's in the equipment, and that's taking temperatures. You know, I put the example about the temperatures and the frequency. So they put a lot of emphasis on making sure, you know, it's obviously a tuberculosis laboratory, so the temperatures are going to be very important for them. So, which is maybe not the case in anatomic pathology because everything is formalin fixed. But in the case of a clinical laboratory, you want to have really good temperature records in all your equipment, and that's one thing that they put a lot of emphasis on. Then the other thing that they also put a lot of emphasis on was into improving their turnaround time for results. Okay, so that would be, let's see, that would be, again, process control. Here in process control, you want to have a turnaround time. And I think it also helps a lot in the occurrence incidents and management improvement, because if you don't have prolonged turnaround times, people are not going to be complaining about not receiving results. So they worked on turnaround time. They also worked a lot on customer satisfaction. I guess it goes with the turnaround time. You want to make sure that your customers are satisfied and address any incident that could uncover something that is more prevalent. Then they started working on their personnel files, making sure that they were all complete, that everybody had the competency doing everything that needed to be done. And I think that's on the previous one, the personnel and organization. They worked on that too. And then they worked a lot on their equipment books, life books. So, making sure that they had a good inventory of their processes and making sure that everything was correct on doing that. But you can see that by addressing certain areas like the equipment, both the temperature and the life, by addressing the personnel, okay, by addressing the process control in both the sample being received and the turnaround time, but all of these things made them jump quite a bit on their score. So I think that that's a very good thing. Now, I think one of the interesting things is the last question I ask is, so they, as I said in the talk, you want to be, certified and then accredited 1 year, and then you want to continue that accreditation and maintain that accreditation. But like everything in life, sometimes the maintenance of the accreditation may slip a little bit. And here they had two areas in which they dropped a little bit. And I think one of the biggest ones is documents and records. Okay, they went from 2 to begin with in their initial 2011 assessment, and then on the 2012 they had 20 points, and then they slipped 2 points on the 2013. But I think documents and records is something that, if you look at what are the most frequent deficiencies that the College of American Pathologists show, is documents. Documents is one of the ones that, every single organization tells you that that's where we're always behind, unfortunately. And then the other area where there was a drop was in the occurrence incidence management and process improvement. And again, I think one of the big things that we need to think about when we're doing the accreditation is we need to continuously be thinking about process improvement. One of the things that we do here at Emory is our quality manager, the person that basically looks at all the quality management for the entire lab. So it's the core lab, the blood bank, the microbiology, every single area of the lab. She makes during what we call quality week, which is going to be next week, during quality week, and for the entire hospital, we tend to be the department that brings to the quality meeting the most quality improvement project. So she's every meeting we have with her is which project are you having? You need to put together this, and you need to do this project, put it in the poster and make sure that it goes into the quality management week. And you really, and so she's constantly behind us because she really wants to have this show off of our projects that we're working on. Like we're working on a variety of different projects in the lab, like embedding phlebotomy in the different units, or doing a variety of different projects. So that process improvement has to be constant and every year, and you have to do it all the time. It cannot stop. Okay. I think that's it for the case. I don't know if anybody wants to comment or has any other ideas. Okay, let's see in the question.
This is good. So yeah. So you're looking at the questions now, Jeanette?
I'm looking at the questions, yes.
Okay. The questions that people are asking are the questions for the...
Well, if people want to comment and think about the case a little more and talk about it if they are willing to.
So we have other questions from still
from
left
the presentation.
Yeah. We have. So remember I had asked about, someone had asked about, actually, so why don't I start, because we have here 3 questions, and one is actually really a comment, and it's about SLMTA, since you were talking about SLMTA.
Mm-hmm.
And the comment is that SLMTA is an important accreditation tool for stepwise for sub-Saharan African countries. And it helps because something, let's see, I'm having trouble here, but I'm working it out. That helps not fail with one assessment, but gives grades and a step-by-step process. So that's just a comment.
Yeah, and I think, and I agree with that. I think it's a great comment, because I think that's one of the beauties of the SLMTA, that that is not asking people to go from 0 to 100. It actually it's a step-by-step process, so it is a very it's achievable. I think one of the biggest problems that sometimes we have when we're thinking about some of these projects is like this is such a huge project. How am I gonna put all my processes in a document or create all this, paperwork? It's just overwhelming. So sometimes what you have to do is bite in small pieces instead of trying to bite a huge cake. You don't want to, eat a cake in one bite. You want to eat the cake in little pieces. And I think that's a little bit the way that you have to think about this accreditation and going through the process. You have to write so many procedures. You want to put your goals in a way that they are achievable. You don't want to put, I have to write 100 procedures in one day, because you're never going to do it.
Yeah. So this one, so we had a question before that I had asked for the questioner to elaborate, and he did. So the original question was, how does accreditation assess attitudinal situation? And then he wrote back and said, how the laboratorians behaves, particularly to outsiders.
I think I touched a little bit about this when I did my first presentation, the introduction. I talked a little bit about the idea that everybody that goes into healthcare is wanting to do it for a good reason. There's obviously people that may not want to do it for the good reason, but in general, people are good, or at least that's the way I feel about it. In general, people are good, and they are not wanting to hurt other people. So I think if you see a behavior by personnel that is not what you're expecting, then you have to go through the process of, what's the root cause? What is causing this person to behave the way they're behaving? And that goes into obviously personnel files, and each country has their own rules as to, how do you counsel somebody? How many times do you counsel them? How many times do you allow a certain behavior that's not right to continue to occur? And then when do you say, this is it, we have to let you go? I don't know if that's where the question is going, but in my mind, if that's what they're thinking about, the attitude that a person has, I think that's something that has to be addressed at the personnel level.
Good, that's great. So the next question says, when conflicts arise between accrediting bodies, what could the lab do to avoid penalty by either body?
Oh my God. I hope that we don't have that very often. Yeah. And I think okay, so I think this is something, and I think I can see this happening. Say that you've developed a certain standard. So it's a standard, it's an internal developed standard. And then that standard is not conforming to ISO. Then that's when you need to change, I guess. And that internal standard may be a country standard, but it's not conforming necessarily with ISO. And so this is where you have to say, okay, you have to say, well, I live in Thailand, so I need to conform to Thailand, whatever. But then you can talk to the people that are in the governance and say, okay, I see that ISO shows this, but you're asking me to do that. So can we, since I want to be ISO certified because it's international, shouldn't we change the standards in such a way from our country, in such a way that we are ISO compliant? And I think to me, that's one of the reasons why you want to go to an international standard, because then it's a bigger body. I don't know if that helped.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So the current last question says, although I do see there's one more person who had their hand raised, but you need to type the question into the question and answer. But so the last question here from Mr. Chisinji is, with the ISO clear on measurement uncertainty. Oh, with ISO being clear that measurement uncertainty is not obligatory for the laboratory to report, why is it then necessary for the lab to labor to calculate uncertainty for their examination tests?
You have to do it. Let me put it this way. I don't care if the clinicians don't care about the uncertainty. I care about the uncertainty. Why do I care about the uncertainty? And why do I care to have a small uncertainty? Because I want to have my analytes in control. So to me, I want to know the uncertainty because I want to make sure that I'm not going beyond outside that uncertainty. I want to know that the uncertainty that I've calculated is the one that I have, that I can use, and that I know that it's not going outside outside the range of my analytes. So I personally want to do it because I want to do the right thing with the test. If ISO asks me to give it to the clinicians, I'll give it to the clinicians. It's going to be a lot of work to put it in a comment. You know, the CV for glucose is between this and this, and I'm not sure that the clinicians will understand it, but we'll do it if we're asked to do something like that. But to me, we need to know it because it's the only way we will know that we're in control.
Okay, we got a question, another question, which is about, oh, this is interesting. Question is, can measurements of uncertainty be applicable to an atomic pathology laboratory? And then he or she, I'm not sure, said, I need an example.
Okay, that is a great question. And I think that applies to semi-quantitative assays. Okay, so you do HER2/neu, okay, on your breast cancers or on your gastric cancer, because we're doing HER2 in so many things. So I'm going to put breast because breast is the usual one. So you have a you are doing HER2/neu. And you know that you have either 0, 1+, 2+, or 3+. Okay, so it's a semi-quantitative assay. So the uncertainty here is going to be how frequently do you have? Are you calling a 2+, a 3+, or vice versa, a 3+, a 2+? How frequently are you calling a 2+, a 1+, or a 1+, a 2+? So that's where the uncertainty goes. You don't want to have an uncertainty that goes between a 0 and a 3+. But you can tolerate, let me put it this way, an uncertainty that goes between a 2+ or a 3+. But maybe you don't want to tolerate that because you know that Herceptin is going to be given to the 3+, and so the only uncertainty that you are going to allow is the 1+ and 2+. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yes, you can do it in AP based on semi-quantitative assays. And the one that I can think of is the HER2. I don't know if that helped.
I think HER2 is a great example for this as a semi-quantitative test in anatomic pathology. So that's it. I think if it wasn't still not clear, please. Oh, she's okay. Haruna said very well. Thank you. Okay, awesome.
The other thing that we had the introduction, people sent later questions and I answered, or sometimes even Dan answered them by by email. There were some questions, like, for example, some examples of Six Sigma that they were asking and things like that. So if you don't have questions right now, but you have questions later, you can email, and then I'll answer, or at least try to answer.
Okay.
Okay. I guess we can finish.
Yeah.
I thank you so much, Jeanette. It's been really fantastic. I apologize. I've just finished my other meeting, but I was listening. Thanks for the participants. And several people have messaged me that they did not get the registration link. The registration link is being mailed about 48 hours before the session, along with any materials you need to review in advance. So we will continue to do that. So expect your next registration email on Sunday, and we will see you next Tuesday. Thanks, everyone.